Anzi.
I love it.
Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Indecision in Ukraine. While it appears there is a commitment to a multilateral ceasefire in the country, fighting continues. Kiev again talks the talk of peace, though its forces pursue their assault in the east. Is Poroshenko in control? To CrossTalk, the crisis in Ukraine, I'm joined by my guest, Alexander Nekrasov in London. He is a political commentator and a former Kremlin advisor. Also in London, we have Padraig Belton. He is a journalist who's been covering East Ukraine for the BBC and The Independent. And in Moscow, we cross to John Robles. He is a writer, presenter, and journalist for The Voice of Russia. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules. In fact, that means you can jump in anytime you want. Padraig, about a month ago, you wrote an article titled, "Poroshenko is likely to fail as Ukraine's new president." Do you still agree with that?
I wouldn't want to be in his shoes, and he probably wishes he was still selling chocolate. He's got a lot to... the deck stacked against him. You know, this war is probably actually going to be the most popular thing that he does. Pretty soon, IMF-induced austerity is going to come online. Yep. The gas price is going to have to go up. The IMF's prediction are that the economy is not going to grow very fast. So it'll be a very rocky 12 months. This is probably actually going to be as good as it gets for him.
Okay, an interesting way. Alexander, you know, ceasefire, no ceasefire, ceasefire, no ceasefire. We have the Berlin talks, and then we have the State Department saying, go, go, go. I mean, what's going on here? The Americans are not saying the same thing as the Europeans, that's for sure.
Well, I think the whole crisis has demonstrated that America has a separate agenda from Europe. It is trying to basically drive a wedge between Russia and Europe. It is failing. A lot of the statements coming from Europe should be taken with a pinch of salt because, you know, Americans expect some of the leaders to say some tough things. Trust me, for example, that in Britain, David Cameron and his government are not very keen on spoiling relations with Russia. The companies like BP, like Shell, they're pressing hard on the government, saying, are you sane, guys? What are you doing? We have multi-billion-dollar contracts there in Russia, and you are talking about, you know, drastic sanctions and so on. As regards President Poroshenko, I think he did his job already. I think he was elected to sign that deal with the EU. That's it, done. Petro now can do whatever he wants. He can, you know, basically sit there and just listen to the orders coming from Washington. So, I mean, that's the end.
Well, and maybe, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. John, if I can go to you here in Moscow, you know, he has right sector looking at him, too. You know, the Mogopoulos sitting there in the Maidan. They're keeping a close eye on him. He's got to do something or he's going to lose their support.
That's absolutely right. I don't envy Petro Poroshenko. I don't support him either, but he's almost in an impossible situation. I agree. I think his main task was signing that EU agreement. He's done that. He also has to keep himself out of some international tribunal or from facing war crimes charges, so he has to try to play both sides of the fence. If you listen carefully to his speeches, though, there's some very coded language for the right sector in there. So it's really doubtful that he's following something other than their agenda, in my opinion.
Padraig, do you think the train has left the station? Because if you look at some of the video coming out of East Ukraine, I mean, shelling of villages. I mean, these people were no threat to anyone. It is quite dreadful looking at these pictures here. It's going to be very, I mean, Poroshenko said he was going to go to the east. The first thing he would do, and he didn't, he went west. Okay, and had a nice photo ops with people. But I think the train has left the station. I'm really worried about that. I don't want to see any kind of military intervention from Russia. I've made that very, very clear. That would be a terrible, terrible mistake. But the slaughter continues.
Can I say something about
Yes.
that?
No, let me go. I'll be fair. Let's go to Padraig. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Cheers. No, I mean, I've been in the East for most of the last month, since I was in the East on election day. What's amazing is that both the DNR and Kiev are saying that they're going to continue talking. I mean, they agreed on Wednesday to carry on talking, and they'll meet in a trilateral format on Saturday. it kind of looks like Poroshenko was trying to achieve a quick, cheeky advantage on the ground to strengthen him at the table. You know, he's got a lot more forces in the ground for one now. He's got between 40,000 and 60,000 forces deployed in the east. In March, there were probably 6,000 battle-ready troops in Ukraine, so that's a massive escalation in terms of boots on the ground. These chaps are learning to fight as they go, because the forces were not in a particularly good state when Poroshenko took over. And there have been some pretty key personnel changes, like Galitsi has just come in as Minister of Defense. There's also been this famed crowdsourcing of kit and even the people's drones. Both sides have got some pretty hefty preconditions, even though they're both saying they're willing to talk. You know, the rebels having to lay down their arms, the Ukrainian forces having to withdraw entirely from the east. But I mean, I heard from a couple of leading separatists in the administration building when I went in and talked to them over the last couple of weeks that they don't think they could hang on for more than a month or two. So I think both sides know that there's going to be a denouement, there's going to be some sort of political encomium, even if both of them say that there won't be. I think that the one thing that Kiev could maybe be usefully leaned on is, you know, he said in his inauguration speech that the devolution was Crimea too. He's quite convinced that any form of devolved government would basically be taken over quite quickly by people who be obstructionists and quite strongly pro-Kremlin. It's not completely clear to me that's the case. So one of the interesting things, and maybe the important thing about the separatists, the DNR, is they're articulating senses of grievances that are pretty widespread in the East. So you know, even after arms are laid down, I think at this point you've got such a massive difference between the national narrative of the Maidan and the national narrative in Donbass.
Okay,
and
John.
They have to be stitched together somehow.
Somehow. John, jump in. Go ahead.
I wanted to protest about the label separatist, but it's okay because I just want to underline the fact that the people are being bombed. They didn't do anything other than disagree to be ruled by I'm sorry, it's a Nazi fascist junta that illegally grabbed power. And they're being punished for disagreeing with that. As far as military operations, I think it's about time there was some sort of international, at least a peacekeeping operation. I don't know how Russia would be able to play a role there, as they've already been labeled the aggressor. But really, the civilian population absolutely needs to be protected there. I think that's imperative. I still don't understand why the European Union is just sitting on their hands.
Okay, I don't think they are sitting on their hands.
Alexander, to let the OSCE
let me go to Alexander here. Alexander, you know, this is the problem here, because you know, one of the things that really bothers me with Western mainstream coverage of this is that all of the diplomacy that Russia has been pushing behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, and we had Mr. Lavrov in Berlin talking to anyone that would listen to him to bring peace to this country, and Russia continues to push diplomacy.
You know, I think the problem is this. We are always talking about what Kyiv and President Poroshenko are thinking or saying or doing. But unfortunately, it's not Mr. Poroshenko who's deciding, but it's the Washington people who decide what he's going to say and what he's going to do. And in my personal opinion, America is at the moment not interested in any peace in eastern Ukraine at all. And there's a reason for it. And the reason being that this is an asset grab. We are witnessing an asset grab by American companies. Now, they're talking a lot about, you know, democracy, the future of Ukraine and Europe, the wonderful future. In reality, behind the scenes, they are taking over Ukrainian assets. They have already taken over this pipeline which runs from Russia to Odessa. That's the chemicals going there to Odessa, to a huge enterprise, which I think is already being bought by an American company. So what they are doing is that they're taking over a full industry, chemical industry in Ukraine. They don't need peace in Washington to be established in Ukraine. They will do anything to stop any negotiations. That is why you, Peter, pointed out, you know, Russia is doing outmost. It's outmost. I don't even know what else can Putin and Lavrov say or do that can convince the Americans to start doing something, but it won't work. it won't work. This is an asset grab. This is a typical aggression.
Well, okay, Padraig, if I go back to you in London, I mean, I agree on some level it's an asset grab, but if the country becomes a failed state, then it's worth nothing.
Yes, I think you're right on this. I think you had a program on this a couple of days ago. No matter what exactly it is that Putin wants, one certain thing that he does not want is a completely destabilized Ukraine. He doesn't want it to fall to pieces on the border.
Absolutely.
This is not in any sense in his interests. And I do think that there will be a massive step back from the precipice reasonably soon. In terms of the Russian economy, it stopped growing, actually, the IMF just said, because of the level 2 sanctions. Nobody on the European side or the Russian side wants it to escalate to further sanctions. I do think we will start to see some political winding down of this rather soon.
Let me go to John before we go to the break here. I mean, again, I think that we missed the point of the political players in Kiev. We have some really radical people on the ground that Poroshenko has to be very, very worried about. They want results, and I worry that we're going to get a Maidan 3.
I think that's quite possible. As far as the failed state, I don't think they really care. I mean, if you look at the people in Libya, if you look at what they did to Iraq, I mean, in Libya they can just buy oil from the bandits that are running around and they're Islamic terrorists. And what I wanted to say about the media coverage, because I've had people coming from directly from Donbass. I've done several interviews. I've been in contact with a lot of people. And what I've heard is that our coverage, RT's coverage, which is the only probably normal coverage in the world of all this, is actually not showing how really, really bad it is. It's worse than what we see.
All right, John, I like what you say, but we got to go to a short break. After that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Ukraine. Stay with RT.
I love it and he's charging.
Does the media lead us or we lead the media?
Privacy versus security. All right, your party, where's it going?
The questions that no one is asking with the guests that you deserve answers from. It's all on politicking, only on RT.
As a new physician, I swear to abide by the Hippocratic Oath, to the best of my ability and judgment. I will prescribe for the good of my patients. I will not give deadly doses to anybody, or advise others to do so. I will never do harm to anyone. Doctors of the Dark Side on RT.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. Do not answer that. I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
I love it and he's charging.
Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. To remind you, we're discussing the recent developments of the Ukraine crisis. Okay, Patrick, I'd like to go back to you in London. Some of the things you said earlier in the program I find really quite interesting, because the way things are going, this anti-terrorist operation, they're not getting any results. They're killing people, but they're not getting any political results, and it's dividing the country more and more. And I would surmise that pretty soon they're going to feel like they're occupied by Kiev, and that's something that is untenable, that will keep the country very divided. We could even see something like a guerrilla war start, which Russia does not need on its border. Go ahead.
In many respects, actually, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, the Ukrainian forces are already being seen in a lot of the East badly. This is tearing Ukraine apart a bit. I mean, you're starting... What's amazing is senior separatists have told me, over coffee last couple of weeks, at the beginning of Maidan, they supported it. They saw it as as a crusade against corruption. They can sign on with a lot of the things that people are saying there in Kiev. And look where it's gone. I mean, you've got a Ukrainian national narrative that's come out of Maidan that doesn't speak at all to the East. It doesn't engage them. It doesn't do anything for them. It doesn't really work them in. And then in the East, they are, more maybe than at any point in the last decade, starting to see themselves as second-rate, as neglected, as not understood. One Donbass MP said to me the other day, Paddy, they're talking about building a wall to keep us wildlings out. What is this all about? And I had to explain Game of Thrones to her. In Slaviansk, I mean, a city of 120,000 people, there's no electricity, really. Somewhere around 30 to 40,000 people have fled, mostly 10 kilometers away to Svyatogorsk. They're in Slaviansk at the moment. I mean, the people who are left are generally the quite infirm, the quite elderly. It is a bad situation, and it'd just be best for everyone, really, the soonest that...
Yeah, well, what's really interesting here, if I can go to Alexander, and now we have the association agreement where the country is going to go quite possibly into a depression, and it's poor already. I mean, this is why Poroshenko has to get something done, something on his name, because now the real pain, and economics affects everyone, and this is going to starting immediately, and the winter's coming. We have no gas contract. Russia has no gas contract with Ukraine. I mean, the worst of it's ahead of us.
I have absolutely no idea how on earth, President Poroshenko and his people were thinking, how this will work out when they sign this agreement. I know they had a sort of a contract to fulfill, that we understand. But, technically on the ground, how are they going to do this when this impact of that agreement kicks in seriously? And, when we were talking about, even before the agreement was signed, I made a point to some of the Ukrainian officials that the European Union is not in a good shape itself. Yep. So I said, what are you doing? Why are you trying to get into it when it's a sinking ship? And yet they don't understand that the big players, apart from Germany, for example, they're all bankrupt. Britain is bankrupt, technically. France is bankrupt. Italy is bankrupt. And yet they're going in. There is no money on the table.
There's no money on the
table.
table.
No money on the table.
Absolutely.
And I can't understand how Poroshenko's people are sitting there and planning their, economic strategy.
Okay,
so how is it going to work?
Alexander, I want to go to John right now. I found out in the last few hours the only thing Ukraine is going to be allowed to export to the European Union are eggs. Really?
That's it.
That's it.
Unbelievable. Their whole industry is going to be completely wiped out. I mean, if they can't trade with Russia, that's it. They're finished. I mean, their industrial sector is going to be gone. Their military industrial sector is going to be gone. Their agricultural sector is finished. I don't see. You mentioned they're all bankrupt. Well, in Ukraine, they're going to have a lot of free, cheap resources. That's the way I'm reading it. I mean, they got that 4.2 billion, or what is it, of gas that's already Russian gas that they're holding there. And I guess what are they going to do? Sell that or get that for free or what?
Padraig, if I go back to you in London, one of the interesting things, and I think it's not commented on enough in media, is that the way things are going with this European Association Agreement and the South Stream pipeline, Russia can replace its factories. It'll be a little painful, but they'll have new factories, not Soviet-era factories. They'll have new ones in Russia that they won't have to worry about. What I'm getting at is that Russia has a long-term view. Now, of course, there's going to be suffering, particularly for the people in the East, but it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. If the European Union and the Americans want Ukraine, take it.
It is important to bear in mind there's a difference between economic integration and actually joining the EU. They're not joining the EU anytime soon. I mean, there's deep and meaningful free trade. That's all they're going to be offered for the foreseeable. There will be winners. They'll be in the West. There will be heavy losers. They're in the East. An internal discussion that Ukraine's not yet had is how winners from free trade are going to compensate losers. And Ukraine has to have that conversation.
Alexander, do you want to jump in there?
Well, I think that basically the problem is that for Ukraine is that there is no strategy on the table. The European Union is offering them nothing. America is offering them nothing. And this was basically an opportunist step by signing that agreement. And we now can understand, by the way, why Viktor Yanukovych didn't go for that, because I suspect his people told him that this is a trap. This is a swamp. We're going to go in, and we will never get out of it. So in this respect, it's very difficult to understand the logic of the people in Kyiv if we don't assume that these people there are not planning to stay long, that they are planning probably to move out and base their future somewhere else. Then it works out for them. But for the long-term future of the country, I don't understand how it's going to work, and I suspect nobody understands.
I got a theory. I got a theory. Okay, John. Here's my theory. Okay. People like Victoria Nuland don't want Vladimir Putin helping out in Syria. The chemical weapons thing. People like Victoria Nuland doesn't want a country like Russia to be involved in Iran's nuclear program. And alleged weapons. They don't want Russia's help. That's what the problem is. This is payback, and they want to create a huge problem on Russia's border and blame all of it on Russia. And by the way, make the Russians pay for it on top of it.
That's what it works out to exactly. There's nothing I can add to what you said. I mean, I think you pretty much got it.
Okay, Alexander, do you want to jump in there?
Well, I think, Peter, there's another important point. When you create tension right on the border of Russia, you do cause Russia a lot of problems, let's face it. And I think this was, on a political and even military level, I think that's what they wanted to achieve. And I think that they caused Russia problems. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
President Putin must be worried. If you have tension like that on your border, right basically at your door, you are worried about this, especially it can spill into Russia. So that they've achieved, instability. I think personally that America is creating instability all across the world. Look what's happening in Hong Kong. They've sent a signal to China, we can do things that will hurt you. And now we have this huge, massive demonstration demanding democracy for some unknown reason all of a sudden, just because, America is playing its games. Look at the Middle East. Look everywhere. Everywhere we're seeing tension, and it sometimes makes no sense at all. None. So
okay. All right. I want to go back to Ukraine here. Patrick, if I'll go back to you were in Eastern Ukraine, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted you on this program, because you have personal experience there. Do they want to stay in Ukraine in a federated way, or the longer this goes on, the more they want to be completely separate and ergo join Russia, which the Russians are not keen on, really?
Depends on who you talk to. You would have a lot of people, even if they see themselves within Ukraine as a country, who will see themselves as meaningfully Russian, but they don't want to live in the state of Russia. They're perfectly happy to live in the state they live in. But at the same time, they're slightly pained when they see attacks on the embassy in Kiev, or there's that phrase that's often used about Putin, which I would repeat here. This causes them some angst, even though they see themselves within Ukraine as a project. The separatists themselves, you talk to them, a lot of them will tell you that at the beginning they would have been reasonably happy with the federal solution. And then they think the moment for that's passed, now they're going to hold out for either independence. What's interesting is that a lot of them actually are saying their preferred solution is independence. You know, they see themselves being a sort of Switzerland who will trade, you know, with the Eurasian Union, but they'll be on their own. And you know, if they're willing to concede that a month ago, you know, the federal solution would have been on the table, you kind of think maybe they could be tempted back to it.
Okay.
And then, of course, you've got you'd have a lot of Ukrainian speakers who see this all as a bit silly. And the people in Slavonsk who just want the fighting to stop.
Yeah, I think, you know, all of this is, unfortunately, you know, if we look a year back, all of this is silly because it never should have happened in the first place. It was intentionally done. Alexander, what what about the self-determination of these people on the ground? Because they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place, because Russia is not going to intervene unless there was some gross ethnic cleansing, which I don't, you know, they're just killing people one at a time here with their shelling. But, you know, what about their self-determination? What's going to happen to them?
Well, I think, you know, it's a dead-end situation at the moment, because the regime in Kiev is not really showing any willingness to talk to the people in the East. Until there is some willingness there to talk to them and, you know, sort of discuss the situation, then I don't think anything can happen. We are still, by the way, have the so-called unity government, right? They called it unity government when they created it after the coup. And it's still people from the, you know, from the West who have no interest in talking to the eastern part and basically no interest in helping the East at all. So until this disbalance exists,
okay, well, that's what
now, by the way,
we
we have a
need balance
constitution.
here. Gentlemen, we've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in London and in Moscow. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.
I'm see.
Sorry.
I love you. Anytime.